Forms of exploitation among trafficked victims. These are the report from the UNODC 2020 reporting on 2018 data. So as you can see here, 50% is sexual exploitation and 38% is forced labor. We don't have data on removal of organs, but it is very high. It's not that low, and that's why the protocol addresses removal of organs. And we have also 60% other criminal activity, begging, forced marriages, and mixed forms also that can have sexual exploitation and labor, mixed forms of exploitation. You can see also baby selling here, and which was also something that I mentioned regarding the expansion of the definition of trafficking that includes different forms of exploitation. So this is regarding the forms. So bear in mind, we have sexual exploitation, forced labor as the two more predominant forms of exploitation. So looking at trafficking for forced labor, again, we can see from the UNODC report, domestic work, you can see the economic sectors here where victims are reported to be exploited. So we have domestic work, that's why we have the ILO Domestic Servitude Act. We have construction work, agriculture, fishing, catering, garment, mining, etc. Risk factors now for forced labor. Obviously, the invisibility of some sectors helps to hide trafficking for forced labor. Obviously, like we said, the lack of alternatives. So if a migrant arrives here and cannot receive any wage, any wage than lower than the basic wage in Greece, or he or she is asked to work extensively and has no rights, this lack of alternatives consists a risk factor. Obviously, like it was already mentioned, migration and the precarious legal status of people arriving to Greece, and the labor-intensive, low-paid, short-term and dangerous work and presence of recruitment agencies. So these are some of the factors that enhance the risk of trafficking for forced labor. I would like to probably underline the invisibility of some sectors. Once you have an invisible job sector, the risk of trafficking existing there is very, very high. And obviously, the precarious legal status and lack of alternatives are also factors that I would consider extremely high, extremely enhancing and boosting the dangers of trafficking for forced labor occurring. So the last report from the UNODC mentioned this is the total number of victims of trafficking. So it's not a low number, right? Now, push factors, like I said, smuggling and trafficking can have similar push factors. Poverty obviously is one of the main reasons that people migrate and people may end up in a trafficking ring. Gender also is it's no coincidence that, as you will see here, 46% of the detected victims are women and 20% are men. That's why gender discrimination and gender inequality has an important role to trafficking. We also mentioned limited economic and education opportunities. Political conflict and war can be a reason that people want to leave and get caught up in a trafficking ring. Obviously, marginalization, discrimination based on ethnicity and race and religion, social and cultural structures. These are more kind of like general, but the most basic ones is poverty and gender, and obviously limited economic education opportunities and poor governance. I think I would mention these four as being key push factors, social-cultural push factors of trafficking. So vulnerability was a word that was mentioned also in the definition of the trafficking in the Palermo Protocol. So vulnerability factors here. Here you can see again from the UNODC percentages of cases by pre-existing factors that traffickers have taken advantage of. So traffickers take advantage of people's economic needs, 51%. One that I didn't expect to see was child with a dysfunctional family, it's 20%. Mental behavioral neurological disorder, people with mental behavioral disorders, these can be a pre-existing factor that traffickers will take advantage of. Immigration status, 10%. A limited education or knowledge of foreign language, and emotional attachment to trafficker. We will see a little bit later discussing grooming and discussing also the lover boy technique online on e-trafficking, the importance of emotional attachment to a trafficker. The trafficker can be actually your husband also. And maybe that will be an interest to see a little bit and for you to reflect on the overlaps between gender-based violence, domestic violence, and trafficking. As I said, these are processes, so you would see overlaps happening. And that's the interesting thing when discussing social issues and social problems about the overlaps between them. It's always more difficult to make clear-cut distinctions when we have to do with human exploitation and human relationships, right? Now, this was the share of detected victims of trafficking, again. So we have 90% of girls and 15% of boys. This is on data from 2018 and the last report of the UNODC 2020. So COVID has accelerated obviously the dangers for victims of trafficking, and here also comes the use of technology, but also enhancing the precarity and vulnerability of groups that are at high risk of being trafficked. Many, from the delays to receiving protection, to the delays to having your case go forward. If you are, for example, in a domestic violence situation and you want to escape. So many reasons having to do with administrative and juridical delays to having access to psychosocial services can also enhance the precarity and vulnerability of groups during COVID, because all these delays obviously happened during COVID and obviously accelerated the vulnerability of groups because they had lower access to the already low access they have to services, and that further enhanced their vulnerability. And also the use of technology, which is going to be the main focus of this training. Now we have also the emergence of cyber flows. This is also mentioned in the UNODC report. So the emergence of a cyber flow and the use of cyberspace for recruitment, advertisement of victims services or victims' organs, and for also attracting clients. Here, before we go further, I would like to mention the different hunting and fishing strategies. I don't know if you've heard of what hunting and fishing is. Basically, hunting involves a trafficker actively pursuing a victim online, typically on social media. Initially, they develop a friendly relationship that can become more aggressive as the relationship evolves. So hunting involves the active pursuit of a victim online, whereas fishing involves posting an advertisement and waiting for potential victims to respond. And often they kind of use job advertisements. We will come in more details in that. I just wanted to mention the emergence also of e-trafficking on the UNODC recent report, and also interlinked with COVID. But we will come into that in more detail in the next section, which will be around 2 o'clock. So the convention provides the setting for an independent monitoring mechanism called GRETA, which guarantees that state parties comply with its provisions. This establishment is kind of like a monitoring mechanism. Greece has also had its Greta report, I think in 2017. It basically aims to acknowledge good practice among states, good practices, indicate which states do better, which are the needs, which states are failing to their obligations. So it's a very important monitoring mechanism called Greta. Each country has Greta reports. And it's usually other experts from the Council of Europe that visit countries and write down Greta reports. So this independent monitoring mechanism is a very important part, important contribution of the Council of Europe Convention Action on Trafficking in Human Beings. Now, if we see a little bit more, which are the key provisions to prevent and protect the rights of victims from the convention, there are, I think, 3 points that we need to probably see. First of all, the SOE refers to the development of identification procedures. So they do discuss there in detail the recruitment of trained personnel by each country to prevent and combat trafficking in every process, identifying, helping victims of trafficking. They do also, the convention also does propose the development of assistant measures that aim to help the recovery of victims from accommodation, psychological and material assistance, emergency and medical treatment, interpretation services, advice and information in a language that the person understands, especially regarding their rights. So this is this part of the convention refers to the necessity of each country that has signed this convention to actually construct and develop assistant measures that aim to help victims in their physical, psychological, and social recovery of the trauma of trafficking. An important point also that I don't know if other countries in their Greta reports have actually accomplished it or have gone forward with it is what the Council of Europe has refers to as a recovery and reflection period of at least 30 days. This basically aims to help the person escape the influence of traffickers, enable the healing of wounds, and take an informed decision about whether the person wants to cooperate with the competent authorities. So if a person wants to cooperate with the police against his or her traffickers. So once a trafficked victim is actually located and identified as a victim of trafficking, the person is given a reflection period of 30 days, right? Where he or she has the ability, has the opportunity to escape the influence of traffickers, receive psychosocial support, but also medical support, and also decide whether he or she wishes to cooperate with the competent authorities to prosecute traffickers. Also, another important provision of the protocol is obviously to protect the privacy and identity of victims. That is very important in case we have, and especially for you that work in camps, it's important to maintain confidentiality, but also the identity of victims and the privacy, because obviously this is a trafficking ring. If something is found out, the name of a victim of trafficking, he or she might be in further danger. So it's important to maintain confidentiality and protect the privacy and identity of victims. So these are some of the key provisions, with the Greta report being an important contribution. Also, protection-based residence permits. So once a victim of trafficking is identified and is given the status of victim of trafficking, he or she is given a residence permit based on the fact that he or she is a victim of trafficking and therefore in need of protection. Obviously, yes, the non-punishment provision and reflection period. The non-punishment provision basically obligates states to take the necessary measures to ensure that the authorities are not entitled to prosecute or impose penalties on trafficked people. Why is this the case? For example, in many occasions, victims of trafficking might find themselves in situations where, for example, they're also involved in drug selling, right? So, but they're also trafficked victims. So the situation is that in that case, we have a state that catches, for example, a sexually trafficked woman who is also at the same time that she's being trafficked and she's sexually abused, and she's also selling drugs, for example, or she's also used to sell drugs to her to the people that basically abuse her. So in that case, we have also a drug issue or a drug violation of law. But in that case, the Council of Europe is establishing the non-punishment rule, which actually says that we need to take the necessary measures as a state to ensure that a trafficked victim will not be prosecuted or impose penalties on them. So that's important, because trafficking victims might be afraid to come out and or to approach the authorities, because they might be afraid either that they will be in further legal trouble if they're involved in other illegal activities. So that is an important also contribution of the Council of Europe Convention that sort of further strengthens the non-punishment provision. Other European legal instruments, we have the EU Anti-Trafficking Directive, which was adopted by the European Commission in 2012. The directive basically, and that's also an important contribution of the EU directive, provides a setting of national rapporteurs or other equivalent mechanisms that carry out assessments of trends on trafficking in persons, and also suggests further protective and preventive measures. Among some of the measures is to provide, obviously, assistance and support to victims before, during, and for an appropriate period of time after the conclusion of criminal proceedings. So this is also an important point here. This assistance and support may not be made conditional on the victim's willingness to cooperate in a criminal investigation, prosecution, or trial. This is an important point because, as we will see in the legal framework in Greece, which actually changed after the ratification of the UNODC and the Palermo Protocol, for some time in Greece, it was provisional to whether or not it was conditional on the victim's cooperation with the authorities, whether or not assistance and support will be offered. So it's an important point, and it's an important legal change, but it's also an important kind of like, how to say, structural or a need to pay more attention to this, because obviously there are other structural factors from racism, for example, or from police authorities that are not kind of like following the rule of the law exactly. So they might actually, for example, say to a trafficked victim, okay, you need to cooperate with us, or for us to provide you help and protect you and provide help and support. So it's important that the legal framework actually says that the assistance and support provided to victims of trafficking is not conditional to whether a victim decides or not to cooperate to the prosecution of traffickers. The establishment of national rapporteurs, like I said, is very important because actually it provides a further monitoring framework in which assessments on trafficking in person per state and in each state are carried out. Results are evaluated of the anti-trafficking actions of each state. And also there is an annual reporting going on. Greece has, we will also discuss that. Greece has since 2013 its own national rapporteur that actually kind of like activates the 4 Ps. We will discuss what is the 4 Ps a little bit later. And finally, we have the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 4, which refers to trafficking. It basically says the Article 4 is prohibits slavery, servitude, and forced labor. The famous case that some of you will know, and we will also have the chance to discuss, is the case of Chodori and others versus Greek, the Manlada case. I will not be referring in detail into that, but our country was actually convicted for that case, for trafficking, for forced labor. And also the case of LE versus Greece, which was basically referring to the shortcomings of the authorities in the investigation of a trafficking case by a Nigerian worker who was forced into prostitution in Greece. So it had to do with the fact that the applicant had to wait for more than 9 months after informing the authorities of her situation before the justice system granted her that status. So it was kind of like a temporal delay, but also our country was convicted for that also. In general, here you can see some main actors and main conventions and main reports on trafficking. We obviously have the UNODC annual report since 2007. We also have the Council of Europe RETA reports on action against trafficking in human beings. The US has a trafficking in person annual world report where you can also access these things. They're actually free. You know, they don't have any passwords or anything. The ILO, the International Labour Organization, and it has 2 important conventions. One forced labor protocol, which was adopted in 2016, and one not mentioning it's not written here, but it's on domestic servitude. Many UA directives and the OSCE special representative in trafficking in persons that have special also reports on the issue. So the counter-trafficking work is transnational. It's larger than we think, and it's ongoing, and especially the last years from 2007 onwards, there is a close attention to changes and developments and need for further work and good practices, bad practices of the states, and what needs to be done further. I didn't mention the 4 Ps anti-trafficking approach. This is the key also of the Palermo Protocol, and it's also what the national rapporteur, not national rapporteur, the national representative here, the national rapporteur here in Greece kind of like has activated in the last years with an NRM, the National Referral Mechanism. So the 4 Ps is basically prosecution, protection, prevention, and partnerships. The only way to fight against trafficking is by these 4 pillars. So the need to prosecute traffickers, protect the victims, prevent trafficking, and establish international, national partnerships. Partnerships between state and non-state actors and NGOs, but also international partnerships among international organizations, NGOs, but also between states. So this is the kind of like the 4 Ps anti-trafficking approach of the UNODC, and it's also what most of all the countries, the 174 that have signed and ratified the Palermo Protocol, are sort of trying to activate and trying to follow. And this is the core of the anti-trafficking work is around these 4 concepts, these 4 these 4 actions: prosecute, protect, prevent, and partner with national and international actors. So again, here you can see important anti-trafficking moments. So we have the Palermo Protocol in 2000. 2005, we have the Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. Here, focusing on victim rights and victim support and assistance. And here the Greta reports, bear that in mind. 2011, we have the anti-trafficking directive, and we have the establishment of the national rapporteurs in countries where they assess the progress of each state. And again, I didn't mention, when International Labour Organization has the Domestic Servitude Act and the Forced Labour Act, 2011 and 2014. So now coming to Greece, the legal context now, an important law was the 3062/2002, where there was basically an attempt to articulate a coherent and response to human trafficking, and Greece was basically trying to align itself with international and European anti-trafficking frameworks. So with the 2002 law, we criminalized human trafficking. We acknowledged that there are links between organized crime and trafficking, and it was kind of what we would describe as the first steps towards a multi-sectorial cooperation, towards a cooperation between multiple actors. Also, the law referred to the need to offer protection and support to victims of trafficking, from shelter, healthcare to legal aid. And an important, yes, that's the point about protect and support. What needs to be underlined probably is that Greece ratified all the above treaties. It has ratified the Palermo, it has ratified the CAO, the EU directive. So this law basically marked a significant change in the Greek penal code. So we have two important changes. One is that the EU law now punishes trafficking for sexual exploitation by imprisonment up to 10 years or up to 20 years if the victim is a minor, or, and here's the important point, or when the offender intends to earn income from the commission of these acts. The new article also penalizes any individual who engages in sexual acts in the knowledge that the person involved is a victim of trafficking. So it's also, if you link it to what we said in the definition, it's also whoever basically enhances the maintenance of a situation of trafficking. It's not only, for example, the trafficker or the person that sexually exploits actively, but it's also who are passively involved. This was also this was an important change of the old article of the Greek Penal Code with this new law. I don't want to go in much details on what the Greek Penal Code discusses about pimping and how that changes, but what you need to kind of get from this part is that with this new law we had the raise of minimum sentences for members of criminal organizations, and also an extension of investigative powers of authorities dealing with cases of organized crime. Then we also had the provisions around a framework for the protection and support of victims of trafficking, as I said, including individuals deemed at risk. And what is important is what I mentioned here. The offer of support was dissociated from the punitive measures against illegal migration. That's an important point, because in 2000, that happened with the 2002 law, because until, for example, 2001, if foreigners, on the 2001 law on foreigners, had authorized prosecutors to defer the deportation of a non-documented migrant if the latter reported the traffickers. So up to a certain point, it was necessary for victims to report the traffickers in order to avoid their deportation, right? With 2002, this was reframed, and it was directly linked to victim protection. Again, there is an overall uncertainty about the status of victims. That uncertainty continued to exist up until 2010 with the ratification of the Palermo Protocol. So In 2005, for example, we have again the deferral of deportation was again made conditional on the victim's cooperation with the police. So we had 2001, this existed. The deportation was linked to cooperation with the authorities. 2002, that changed, linked to victim protection, so no deferral, no deportation. Then 2005, we had again the deferral of the deportation conditional on the victim's cooperation with the police. I'm just trying to underline the back and forth of the legal context in Greece on this, right? And after the ratification of the UN OTC, obviously after that, there is no requirement of a cooperation with the police in order for a victim of trafficking to have access to support. So they have full rights of access to the labor market, to healthcare, to education, and to vocational training. So a victim of trafficking is not now obliged to cooperate with the police. He or she will not be deported, theoretically only, in theory. I'm saying what would be the ideal, right? I'm not saying that this was exactly what is happening. There are many gaps going on. But it's important to know the legal context and know that, you know, there is a support is dissociated from any punitive measures against illegal migration and any obligation of the victim to cooperate with the police. So here, before we sort of close the anti-traffic, the legislative framework, the anti-trafficking policy framework in Greece, these are some important moments. In 2002, we had the law that I just mentioned. It was kind of like a first response. It criminalized human trafficking. It acknowledged the links between organized crime and trafficking. It tried to offer victim support and protection, basically acknowledged the problem, made some changes in terms of to the previous Greek penal code, raising also minimum sentences, trying to establish a sort of kind of like enhance the cooperation between the authorities. In 2004, we have a national action plan, which was the first kind of another attempt to align the Greek legal framework with international European conventions. That was from 2003 to 2017. It also it led to the establishment of a forum, the Memorandum of Cooperation on Combating Trafficking in Persons in 2005, which was basically kind of like, it was basically a cooperation between different secretariats, Justice, Interior, General Secretariat for Gender Equality, Foreign Affairs, etc., 12 NGOs and IOM. So it was also an attempt to establish what the trafficking protocol was saying about the need for international cooperation, for partnerships also, and in national partnerships. In 2006, also, we have an interagency action plan called ELAIRA, which aimed to further sort of strengthen the links between the Ministry of Citizens Protection, law enforcement officials, the Greek police, and other NGOs, and international NGOs and national NGOs. In 2013, we have the establishment of the National Rapporteur, following also the EU directive, indicating also Greece's full participation in the wider European international structures. And also, after the establishment of the National Rapporteur, we have the set in motion, his or her attempt to set in motion the 4 Ps, the prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships, and where basically the role of the Rapporteur is to set the 4 Ps in motion, and also kind of like help establish a national database, integrate, for example, national referral mechanism, and develop a national referral mechanism for the identification of victims. Angeliki is going to talk in more detail on that. And finally, in 2019, we have the national referral mechanism, which was launched on January 2019 and managed by the National Center for Social Solidarity, which is basically very victim-centered right now. So these are kind of like some of the key moments in Greece. What you need to bear in mind is that there are serious gaps also in its implementation. Not only in the field of rights guaranteed to survivors for their protection, but also by law enforcement, but also by juridical authorities, but also in the field of protection of their daily needs. This means also that there is a need for professionals to be more trained in the hosting sites and in accommodation centers to be informed about trafficking in order to be able to offer better protection on the basis of the daily needs also of trafficked victims. So yes, that was it in terms of this part of the legislative framework in Greece. I wanted you to kind of like take with you these kind of like back and forths of the Greek legal framework, but also kind of like this attempt to align with international and European frameworks, but at the same time having gaps in the institutional infrastructure regarding victim protection, interagency cooperation. So it was kind of like Greece following international pressures to conform, and at the same time trying to kind of like reformulate and how to say change and ameliorate its institutional framework regarding victim protection, regarding prosecution, interagency cooperation, etc. So there's always kind of like a gap between theory and practice going on in Greece, also elsewhere, but yeah.